The rain fell hard that Tuesday evening, drumming against the windows of the Viridian Dynamics headquarters like it had something urgent to say. Inside the building, everything was quiet. Too quiet for a place that usually buzzed with energy, late-night meetings, and the constant hum of ambition. But by 8:30 p.m., most of the employees had gone home. Only a few stragglers remained, buried in spreadsheets or chasing deadlines that never seemed to end. On the top floor, in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that stretched across the entire city skyline, a woman sat alone. She wasn't supposed to be there this late, not tonight. She had promised her daughter she'd be home by 7. There was a school recital, a piano piece the girl had practiced for weeks. But then the earnings call ran long. Then the board demanded revisions. Then another emergency email popped up. And just like that, another promise slipped through her fingers. She stared at her phone. The screen dark except for the time, 8:37 p.m. A photo of her daughter smiled back at her from the lock screen. 10 years old, gap-toothed, holding a trophy from last year's science fair. Her eyes were bright, full of trust. The kind of trust that says, I know you'll be there. But she hadn't been there. Again. The woman stood up slowly, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor. She grabbed her coat, her briefcase, and walked out without turning off the lights. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. She watched the floor numbers tick down, 40, 39, 38, and with each one, the weight in her chest grew heavier. Not the kind of weight you can shrug off. This was deeper. It sat right behind her ribs, pressing against her lungs, making it hard to breathe. When the doors opened to the underground parking garage, the cold hit her first. Then the silence. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows between the rows of luxury cars. Hers was parked near the far end. A sleek black sedan paid for with bonuses she barely remembered earning. She walked toward it, heels echoing in the empty space, but halfway there her legs just stopped. She leaned against a concrete pillar, closed her eyes, and let out a breath she didn't even know she'd been holding. And then it happened. The dam broke. Tears came fast, hot and silent at first. Then they turned into quiet sobs, then ragged gasps. She slid down the pillar until she was sitting on the cold concrete floor. Her coat bunched beneath her. Her briefcase tipped over beside her. Papers spilled out. Financial reports, strategy decks, performance reviews, but she didn't care. None of it mattered right now. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from her daughter. Did you see me play? She couldn't answer, not yet. Her fingers trembled as she typed, deleted, typed again. Nothing felt right. How could she explain that she'd been in a room full of people talking about profit margins, while her child played a song meant just for her? She pressed the phone to her ear like it might somehow connect her to her daughter's voice, even though no call was coming. And in that moment, exhausted, heartbroken, and utterly alone, she whispered into the silence, Please, don't leave me here alone. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't even really a plea. It was just the truth slipping out, raw, unfiltered, and desperate. She hadn't said those words out loud since her husband died 2 years ago. Back then, she'd held it together for everyone else. The board needed a steady hand. The shareholders needed confidence. Her daughter needed a strong mom. So she buried the grief, locked it away, and kept moving. But grief doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It waits. And tonight, it had caught up with her. She didn't hear the footsteps at first. Too lost in her own storm. But then a soft shuffle, a pause. Someone was nearby. She froze, wiping her face quickly, trying to pull herself together. Corporate CEOs didn't cry in parking garages, especially not hers. She'd built her reputation on control, precision, calm under pressure. If anyone saw her like this, she looked up. A man stood a few yards away holding a janitor's cart. He wasn't in a suit. He wore a navy uniform with a Viridian patch on the sleeve, work boots, and a faded baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He looked tired, really tired, but his eyes were kind. Not curious, not judgmental, just there. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood quietly like he was giving her space to decide what came next. Maybe he'd pretend he hadn't seen anything. Maybe he'd walk away. That's what she expected. But then he took a slow step forward. Not too close. Just close enough. You okay, ma'am? He asked, his voice low and steady. She wanted to say yes. To nod, stand up, smooth her hair, and act like nothing happened. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat was tight. So she just shook her head once barely. He didn't push. Didn't offer empty comfort like, it'll be fine or you'll get through this. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean, folded handkerchief, white, slightly worn at the edges. He held it out to her. She hesitated, then took it. The fabric was soft, smelling faintly of laundry soap and something warm like sun-dried cotton. "Thanks," she whispered, her voice rough. He nodded.
"Long day?"
She almost laughed. "You could say that." He glanced toward her car, then back at her. "Your little girl's recital was tonight, wasn't it? Saw the flyers in the lobby. Spring melodies. My boys' class did one last month." He played the recorder. Sounded like a cat in a blender, but he was proud. She looked at him, surprised. "You have a son?" "Yeah, 8 years old. Smart kid. Quiet. Takes after his mom." He said it gently, but there was a sadness underneath, like he was used to carrying it. She didn't ask. She could see it in the way his shoulders slumped just slightly, in the way his eyes flickered toward the ground for a second too long. "I missed it," she said, her voice breaking again. Again. He didn't say, "It's okay," or "You'll make it next time." He just said, "That hurts." And somehow those 2 words undid her all over again. Because they were true. It did hurt. Deeply. And no one had acknowledged that in a long time. She wiped her eyes with the handkerchief, trying to steady herself. "I'm supposed to have it all together. The company, the board, my daughter. I'm supposed to be the strong one." "Nobody's strong all the time," he said simply. "Even the strongest trees bend in the storm." She looked at him, really looked. He wasn't much older than her, maybe a few years younger. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worry. His hands were rough, working hands. But his presence was calm, like a steady anchor in choppy water. "Who takes care of you?" she asked before she could stop herself. He gave a small, tired smile. "My boy, he keeps me going. And I guess I keep him going too. We're all each other's got." She thought of her daughter waiting at home, probably still in her recital dress, wondering why Mom didn't come. She thought of the empty house, the silence, the mountain of emails waiting for her tomorrow. And for the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a CEO, not as a title, but as a person. A mother. A woman who was hurting. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "But I know yours." "Everyone does," she winced. "I wish they didn't sometimes." He nodded like he understood. "Fame's heavy when you're already carrying grief." She stared at him. "How did you—" "You wear it like a second coat," he said gently. "Same way I used to." She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. In that moment, they weren't boss and employee. They were just 2 people in a cold garage, both missing someone they loved, both trying to hold it together for the ones who depended on them. After a long silence, she stood up slowly, brushing off her coat. She handed the handkerchief back to him. "Keep it," he said. "You might need it again." She almost refused, but then tucked it into her pocket instead. "Thank you. For what?" "For not walking away." He gave a small shrug. "Wouldn't feel right." She walked to her car, opened the door, then turned back. "What's your shift tomorrow?" "Night crew." 11 to 7. She nodded. "I'll see you around." "Count on it," he said, already turning back to his cart. She drove home in silence, the rain still falling. But something had shifted. The weight was still there, but it felt shared. Just a little. When she walked into the house, her daughter was asleep on the couch, still in her dress, a half-finished drawing on the coffee table, a picture of 2 people holding hands under a big yellow sun. One had long hair. The other was smaller, with pigtails. She knelt beside the couch, brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face and whispered, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Then she pulled out the handkerchief from her pocket, held it in her hand for a moment, and made a quiet promise, not just to her daughter, but to herself. No more pretending, no more carrying it all alone. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the city, a single father pushed his cart through empty hallways, thinking about the woman who cried in the garage and hoping, just a little, that she'd be okay. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person stepping forward in the dark to remind you that you're not as alone as you feel. He didn't sleep much that night, not because of the rain that had stopped hours ago, but because of the echo in his chest. The way she'd looked at him in that garage, like she'd been holding her breath for years and finally let go. He kept seeing it. The way her hands shook, the tear tracks on her cheeks, the quiet desperation in her voice when she whispered, "Please, don't leave me here alone." He'd heard plenty of things in his years working nights at Viridian. Arguments over promotions, hushed breakups in stairwells, the occasional sob from an intern overwhelmed by deadlines. But this was different. This wasn't stress. This was grief wearing a power suit. He pushed his cart down the empty hallway on the 15th floor, the squeak of its wheels the only sound in the building. His shift had started at 11, but his mind kept drifting back to that moment in the garage. He'd almost not said anything, almost walked past like he hadn't seen her. But something, maybe it was the way she looked so small against that big concrete pillar, or maybe it was the memory of his own son curled up on the couch last winter, asking why Mommy wasn't coming back, made him stop. Now, as he wiped down the conference room tables, he thought about his boy at home, asleep in his Spider-Man pajamas, clutching the same stuffed rabbit he'd had since he was 3, the one his mother had bought him the week before she got too sick to leave the hospital. Some nights the kid still asked if she was watching him from the stars, and every time he'd say yes, even though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. He checked his phone. 2:17 a.m., a text from his sister. Noah slept okay. Asked about you twice, said he dreamed you were building a treehouse together. He smiled faintly. They'd talked about building one for months, but between his shifts and the cost of lumber, and the fact that their apartment complex didn't allow structures in the yard, it kept getting pushed off. Next weekend, he'd say. But next weekend never came. He sighed and tucked the phone back into his pocket. Responsibility didn't take weekends off. Not when you were the only parent, not when every dollar counted. Not when your kid looked at you like you held the whole world in your hands. Back in the break room later, he heated up leftover soup in the microwave, the kind you buy in bulk because it's cheap and fills you up. As he stirred it, he glanced at the company bulletin board. There was a new notice. Employee Wellness Initiative, pilot program launching next month, on-site childcare support, flexible scheduling options, mental health resources. Signed by the CEO herself. He blinked. That was unexpected. Viridian wasn't known for being soft. In fact, just last year they'd cut the holiday party budget to optimize operational efficiency. Now they were offering childcare. He read the notice again. Something about it felt familiar. Not the words, but the tone. Like someone had finally listened. He didn't connect the dots right away. Not until the next evening. It was Thursday. He was cleaning the executive floor, rare for him since that was usually handled by a separate team. But someone had called in sick and he'd volunteered. Less traffic up here at night. Quieter. Easier to think. He was emptying a trash bin near the corner office when he saw her. She was sitting at a small table in the break area just outside her office, laptop open but not typing. Instead, she was staring at a photo taped to the screen, a little girl in a blue dress standing proudly beside a piano. Her daughter, he guessed. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup. But there was something different about her, too. Less rigid, less like she was bracing for impact. He hesitated, then knocked lightly on the doorframe. She looked up, startled at first, then recognition flickered in her eyes. "Oh, it's you," he nodded. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Actually, thanks again. For the other night, he didn't sit, just leaned against the doorway." "How's your daughter?" "She's okay. Mad at me, but okay." She gave a small, tired laugh. She made me listen to the whole recital on her tablet 3 times. Said I owed her ears. He smiled. "Kids have a way of making sure you pay your debts." "She does." She paused, then asked, "How's your son?" "Good, quiet. Asked me today if clouds have feelings." She raised an eyebrow. "And what did you say?" I told him maybe they do. Maybe that's why some days they cry rain. She looked at him for a long moment, like she was seeing him for the first time, not as staff, not as background noise, but as a person with thoughts, with stories, with a heart that had been cracked open and stitched back together more than once. "You're a good dad," she said quietly. He shrugged, just trying not to mess it up. Join the club. They sat in comfortable silence for a minute. Then she closed her laptop. I saw the wellness notice. The child care pilot, that was unexpected. He didn't say anything. But she kept going. "I pushed for it," she admitted. After that night, I realized how many people here are probably just like us. Juggling everything, scared to say they're drowning. He nodded slowly. Most folks don't think people like you get tired. People like me? She asked, almost amused. You know what I mean. The ones at the top. The ones who seem like they've got it all figured out. I don't have anything figured out, she said, her voice low. I just learned how to hide the mess better than most. He understood that. He'd spent years hiding his own, canceling playdates because he couldn't afford the entrance fee to the trampoline park, pretending he wasn't hungry so his son could have seconds, smiling through parent-teacher conferences while his mind raced about how to pay the electric bill. Later that week, something small happened, so small most people wouldn't notice. His supervisor called him into the office. Got good news, the man said, shuffling papers. Your request for adjusted hours? Approved. You can start your shift at 10 p.m. instead of 11. Gives you an extra hour with your boy in the morning. He stared. But I only submitted that form last week. And HR usually takes weeks. Yeah. Well, the supervisor said, scratching his neck. Apparently someone upstairs flagged it as priority. Didn't say who. He knew. Then came the flyer in his locker. Grief support group for families sponsored by Viridian Employee Care. Free childcare provided during sessions. He'd been looking for something like this for months but couldn't afford the fees at private centers. Now it was here, free, convenient, thoughtful. He didn't know how to thank her, so he did the only thing that felt right. That weekend, he sat at his kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. He wasn't a writer. Words didn't come easy to him like they did to the people in the boardroom. But he tried. Dear Leader, he wrote, then crossed it out. Too formal. To the person who listens. He tried again. He ended up with, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you're tired. Thank you for remembering that we're all human. He didn't sign it. Just folded it neatly and slipped it into an interoffice envelope addressed to CEO Personal. Dropped it in the mail slot Monday morning before his shift. He didn't expect a reply. He didn't even expect her to read it. But a few days later, he found a small package in his locker. Inside was a children's book. The rabbit listened, and a note that said only, for your son, and for you. He read the book that night to his boy, his voice catching on the part where the rabbit just sits quietly with the sad child, not trying to fix anything, just being there. His son leaned against him sleepy-eyed and whispered, That rabbit's nice. Yeah, he said, hugging him close. He is. Meanwhile, she started noticing things too, like how the break room on the 15th floor always had fresh coffee in the morning, even though it wasn't on the cleaning schedule, or how someone had started leaving a single sunflower in a vase on the windowsill of the wellness room. Her favorite flower. Though she hadn't told anyone, she found another note one afternoon, tucked into her planner. Your daughter's piano piece was beautiful. I heard it through the open door during setup. She plays like she's telling a story. She hadn't known anyone was there, but someone had been listening. It wasn't grand gestures. No speeches, no public acknowledgments. Just quiet acts of seeing each other, really seeing and saying without words, I know you're trying. I see you. One rainy afternoon, she walked past the loading dock and saw him helping his son with homework at a folding table near the staff entrance. The boy was struggling with fractions. He wasn't frustrated, just patient. Think of it like sharing pizza, he said. If you have one pizza and 4 friends, how much does everyone get? The boy's face lit up. A quarter. Exactly. She watched from a distance, unnoticed. The way the boy leaned into his father's side, the way the man ruffled his hair after he got it right. It reminded her so much of her own daughter. The laughter, the quiet moments, the unspoken love that filled the space between words. She realized then that she'd been so focused on being the perfect CEO, the perfect provider, that she'd forgotten what really mattered. Being present. Not perfect, just there. That night, she canceled a non-essential meeting. She picked up takeout from her daughter's favorite Thai place. And when she got home, she sat on the floor of the living room and let her daughter teach her how to play that piano piece, note by clumsy note. It wasn't about fixing everything overnight. It was about starting, and somewhere in the rhythm of their separate lives, 2 people who'd once felt utterly alone were beginning to find their way back. To their children, to themselves, and, in the quietest way possible, to each other. Not as CEO and employee, not as titles or roles, but as two humans who'd looked into the same kind of darkness and chosen, again and again, to keep showing up, for their kids, for their work, and slowly, for each other. Because sometimes healing doesn't come in loud declarations. Sometimes it comes in a folded note, a shared sunflower, or the simple act of someone remembering that you, too, are carrying something heavy, and that's enough to make you feel a little less alone. The changes at Viridian didn't happen overnight, but they started showing up in small, quiet ways like dandelions pushing through cracks in concrete. People noticed, not in a flashy, headline-grabbing way, but in the kind of shifts that make your shoulders relax just a little when you walk into work. The break room on the 12th floor got a new coffee machine, one that didn't break every other day. The vending machine started carrying healthier snacks, not just chips and candy. And then there was the real surprise. A bright, cheerful room near the east wing painted in soft blues and yellows, filled with toys, books, and tiny chairs. A sign on the door read, "Family Corner, open to all Viridian parents." No one had seen anything like it before. In a company that once measured success in quarterly profits and late-night emails, this felt almost radical. But the biggest shift wasn't in the building. It was in her. She still wore sharp blazers and led high-stakes meetings, but something had softened. She started ending calls 5 minutes early so she could pick up her daughter from after-school club. She kept a small photo of the two of them on her desk, not hidden in a drawer but right next to her monitor where everyone could see it. And when someone asked how she was doing, she sometimes said, "Tired, but okay," instead of the usual, "Great, thanks." One afternoon, she walked past the family corner and saw him there. He wasn't cleaning. He was sitting cross-legged on a colorful rug helping his son with a puzzle. The boy was explaining each piece with intense focus, hands moving fast, eyes bright. He looked lighter, happier, like the weight he'd been carrying had eased just a bit. She paused in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. But the boy spotted her first. "Hi," he called out, waving. She smiled and stepped inside. "Hi, that looks like a tough puzzle." "It's a dragon," he said proudly, with fire coming out its nose. See, she knelt beside them. "Wow, that's impressive." The man looked up at her, a little surprised but not uncomfortable. "Didn't expect to see you down here." "I come by sometimes," she said, "to check on things." He nodded, then gestured to the room. "This place, it's been a game changer. Noah used to get so anxious waiting for me after school. Now he comes here, plays with the other kids, does his homework. Feels safe." "I'm glad," she said softly. "That's exactly why we built it." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the boy fit two pieces together with a satisfied click. "He missed his mom's birthday last month," the man said quietly. "Wrote her a letter and left it under his pillow. Said maybe the wind would carry it to her." Her chest tightened. She knew that feeling. The helplessness of watching your child grieve, knowing you can't fix it, can't bring back what's gone. "I used to think if I just worked harder, earned more, gave her more things, it would fill the hole," she admitted. "But it doesn't work that way, does it?" "No," he said. "It doesn't, but being there, that helps. Even when you don't have the right words." She looked at her hands. "I missed her recital. Again, last week I almost missed her science fair. I keep promising I'll do better, but the work, it never stops." "Maybe it's not about doing more," he said gently. "Maybe it's about being present in the moments you do have." She thought about that. It sounded simple, but it wasn't. Presence meant putting the phone down. It meant listening even when you were exhausted. It meant showing up, even when you felt like you had nothing left to give. Later that week, she made a decision. She called a meeting with her leadership team, not in the boardroom, but in the family corner. At first, they looked confused, shifting in the tiny chairs, knees bumping the low tables, but she didn't care. "I want to talk about what really matters," she said, standing in the center of the room. "We've built a company that's strong, profitable, respected. But are we building a place where people can breathe? Where they can be parents, partners, humans, not just employees?" She told them about the notes she'd received. About the single dad who worked nights so his son could have therapy. About the new mom who cried in the stairwell because she couldn't pump milk without feeling guilty. About the intern who skipped meals to afford bus fare. "I used to think strength meant never showing weakness," she said. "But real strength is creating a space where people don't have to hide." The room was quiet. Then one by one they started sharing their own stories. After the meeting, she walked back to her office, feeling lighter than she had in years. On her desk was another note, unsigned like the others. You're not just changing a company. You're giving people permission to be whole. She tucked it into her journal, right next to the handkerchief she still carried. Meanwhile, he started noticing other changes too. His son's school had partnered with Viridian for a new after-school program, free for employees' kids, with homework help and art classes. Noah came home one day with a painting of a treehouse all bright greens and blues. They said we can build real ones in the community garden next summer, he'd said, eyes wide with excitement. He didn't have the heart to tell him they still couldn't afford the materials. But then a week later, a package arrived at his apartment. Inside was a gift card to a hardware store and a note, for the treehouse. Start with the latter. He stood in the kitchen holding the card, tears pricking his eyes. No name, no return address, but he knew. He didn't thank her directly. Instead, he started leaving things too. A small potted sunflower appeared on the windowsill of her office. Then a children's book about courage. Then a handmade card from his son that read, "Thank you for helping my dad smile more." She kept every single one. One Saturday morning, she took her daughter to the community park. They were feeding ducks by the pond when she saw them, him and his son flying a red kite near the big oak tree. Her daughter tugged her sleeve. "Mom, look! That boy from the science fair." She smiled. "Want to say hi?" They walked over. The boy spotted them and waved wildly. "Hi, Lily." Lily grinned. "Hi, Noah." The two kids ran off together, chasing the kite as it dipped and soared in the wind. The adults stood side by side watching. "He talks about her all the time," he said. "Says she's the smartest kid in school." "She says the same about him," she replied. "Says he's the only one who doesn't laugh when she gets excited about bugs." They shared a quiet laugh. For a while, they just stood there enjoying the sun, the sound of children laughing, the simple peace of a moment without deadlines or expectations. "You know," he said after a while, "I used to think people like you lived in a different world, all meetings and private jets and fancy dinners. And I thought people like you were just part of the background," she admitted. "Invisible, but we're not, are we?" "No," she said. "We're just people, trying our best," he nodded. "Trying's enough." Later, as they packed up to leave, Lily ran back with a dandelion puffball. "Make a wish," she said, holding it out to her mom. She closed her eyes. Made a wish, not for more success, not for bigger deals, but for more days like this, simple, real, full of laughter and light. When she opened her eyes, she saw him watching her, a small smile on his face. "You look happy," he said. "I am," she replied, for the first time in a long time. Back at work on Monday, she announced a new program, Shared Stories. Once a month, employees from all levels would gather, not to talk about projects or profits, but to share personal stories. Grief, hope, parenting, wins and fails. The things that make us human. The first session filled up in an hour. That night, during his shift, he found a flyer in his locker with a handwritten note. "You should speak at the next one. Your story matters." He almost said no. He wasn't a speaker. He wasn't used to being seen. But then he thought of his son, proudly showing off his treehouse drawing, and he thought of the woman who'd cried in the garage and now led with her heart. Maybe it was time. So he said yes. And when the night came, he stood in front of a room full of people, executives in suits, janitors in uniforms, interns with nervous smiles, and told them about loss, about love, about showing up even when you're broken. He didn't use big words. He didn't try to impress anyone. He just told the truth, and when he finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in quiet applause, not loud but deep, the kind that comes from the heart. Afterward, she found him near the coffee table, holding a paper cup like it might steady him. "You were amazing," she said. He shook his head. "I just talked." "That's the point," she said. "Sometimes just talking is the bravest thing you can do." They stood together for a moment. Two people who'd once been strangers, now bound by something deeper than titles or roles. Outside, the city lights shimmered. Inside, something new was growing, not just in the company, but in them. Because connection doesn't need grand gestures. It just needs one person to say, "I see you," and another to believe it, and in that belief, healing begins. The call came at 2:17 a.m. She was already awake, again, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Her daughter had fallen asleep hours ago, curled up with her stuffed owl, but sleep wouldn't come for her. Too many thoughts, too much guilt, too many promises she hadn't kept. When the phone rang, her heart dropped before she even saw the number. It was the school nurse. "Ms. Martinez? It's Lily. She's running a high fever and having trouble breathing. We've called an ambulance. They're taking her to St. Mary's." The world narrowed to a single point. Everything else, the board meeting tomorrow, the investor presentation, the unread emails, vanished. All that mattered was her child. She threw on jeans and a sweater, grabbed her keys, and ran. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights felt harsh, the air too cold. Nurses moved quickly down the hallways, speaking in calm, practiced voices. She found her daughter in a small room, hooked to monitors, oxygen tubes under her nose, face pale and sweaty. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard her mom's voice. "Hey, sweet pea," she whispered, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "Did I do something wrong?" Lily asked, voice weak. "No, baby, never." Her throat tightened. "You just got really sick. That's all." But she knew better. This wasn't just a virus. This was stress, exhaustion. A little body pushed too hard, trying to be brave while her mom was always somewhere else. The doctor confirmed it later. Pneumonia, brought on by fatigue and emotional strain. "Her immune system's been running on empty," he said gently. "She needs rest. And she needs you." Those words hit like a punch. She canceled everything. The board meeting. The investor call. The overseas trip. For the first time in years, she put work on hold. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Because her daughter needed her, not her title, not her success, just her. She stayed by the hospital bed for 2 days straight. Slept in the stiff chair. Ate a hospital cafeteria food. Read stories until her voice went hoarse. Held her daughter's hand through fever dreams and quiet tears. On the third night, after Lily finally fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, she stepped into the hallway for air. The hospital was quiet now. Most visitors gone, lights dimmed. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed, feeling the weight of everything crash over her. She wasn't failing at work. She was failing as a mom, and in that moment, she felt more alone than ever. Then she heard footsteps. Slow, familiar. She opened her eyes. He stood a few feet away, holding a small paper bag and a stuffed animal, a soft blue bear with a red scarf. His son was with him, half asleep, leaning against his leg, clutching a backpack. She blinked, confused. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away, just walked over and handed her the bear. Noah picked it out. Said Lily looked like she needed a brave friend. She took it, fingers brushing the soft fur. "Thank you." He nodded toward the room. "How is she?" "Better. Sleeping." He leaned against the wall beside her, not too close, just enough to share the space. "I heard through the grapevine. One of the nurses used to work at Viridian. She mentioned your name." She let out a shaky breath. "I should have been paying attention. I was so busy trying to keep everything together at work, I didn't see her falling apart." "You're human," he said simply. "You can't see everything. But I'm her mom. I'm supposed to." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "After my wife passed, I tried to do everything myself. Work double shifts, cook, clean, help with homework. Thought if I just pushed harder, I could make up for her not being here. But Noah started having panic attacks. Couldn't sleep. Wouldn't go to school. The therapist said it wasn't about what I was doing. It was about what I wasn't. I wasn't letting him see me grieve. I wasn't letting him know it was okay to be sad." She looked at him. "What did you do?" I stopped pretending. Sat with him on the floor and cried. Told him I missed her too. That it hurt. And you know what? He hugged me and said, "It's okay, Dad. We can be sad together." Her eyes filled with tears. I keep trying to be strong for her. But maybe she just needs me to be real. "Yeah," he said. "Kids don't need perfect parents. They need present ones." They stood in silence for a while, the only sound the soft beep of monitors down the hall. Then his son tugged his sleeve. "Dad, can we go in? Just for a minute?" He looked at her, asking permission. She nodded. They stepped quietly into the room. Lily stirred but didn't wake. Noah tiptoed over and placed the blue bear gently on her pillow, then whispered, "Get better soon." As they turned to leave, Lily's eyes opened. She saw the bear, then Noah, and gave a tiny smile. "Thanks," she whispered. Noah nodded seriously. "You're welcome." Back in the hallway, she felt something shift inside her. Not fixed, nothing was fixed yet, but lighter. Like she wasn't carrying this alone anymore. "Why did you come?" she asked him. He shrugged. "Because someone once told me not to leave her alone." And I remembered. She looked down, tears spilling over. "I don't know how to do this. Be a good mom and run a company. It feels impossible." "It is impossible," he said. "If you try to do it all by yourself." She looked up at him. "What do you mean?" "You don't have to choose," he said gently. "You don't have to be perfect at work to be a good mom. And you don't have to quit your job to be present. You just have to be honest about what you need and let people help." She thought about that. All this time she'd seen asking for help as weakness. But maybe it was the opposite. The next morning she made a call. Not to her assistant, not to her lawyer, to her sister. "I need you," she said. "Can you come stay with Lily while I handle a few things at work? Just for a couple of days?" Her sister didn't hesitate. "I'll be there by noon." Relief washed over her. Later that day, as she sat in the hospital cafeteria with a cup of terrible coffee, he joined her again, this time alone. "I told my supervisor I might need to adjust my hours for a bit," he said, "in case you need someone to cover school pickups or sit with her after work." She stared at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. "But I want to." And that's when she realized this wasn't charity. This wasn't pity. This was community. This was what happens when people stop hiding and start showing up for each other. Over the next week, small acts of care filled the space where loneliness used to live. Her assistant brought her favorite soup to the hospital. A colleague covered her meetings without being asked. The school principal sent a handmade card from Lily's class. And every evening, he or his son stopped by with a small gift, a drawing, a flower, a joke written on a sticky note. Lily started to heal, not just her body, but her spirit. She laughed again, asked for her mom to read her stories, even talked about going back to piano lessons. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the hospital window, Lily looked at her mom and said, "You stayed." "I did," she replied, holding her hand. "Even when you were busy?" "Especially when I was busy," she said. "Because you matter more than anything." That night, after Lily fell asleep, she sat in the chair and wrote an email, not to the board, but to the entire company. It was short, honest, human. "My daughter is in the hospital. She's going to be okay, but it's reminded me of something important. We are more than our job titles. We are parents, children, friends, and sometimes life asks us to put those roles first. If you ever need to do the same, please know, Viridian has your back. Take the time. Be where you're needed. The work will wait." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of messages poured in, not about projects or deadlines, but about gratitude, relief, stories of their own struggles, their own fears, their own moments of choosing family over work. She wasn't just leading a company anymore. She was leading with her heart, and he saw it. Saw the change not just in her actions, but in her eyes. The armor was gone. What remained was something far stronger: authenticity. One evening, as they sat together in the hospital garden, Lily asleep inside, the city lights twinkling beyond the trees, he said, "You're different now," she smiled faintly. "Is that a bad thing?" "No," he said. "It's brave." She looked at him. "I used to think leadership meant having all the answers. Now I think it means being willing to ask for help." He nodded. "Same goes for parenting." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people truly understand each other. Later, as he stood to leave, she said, "Thank you. For everything." He paused. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said. "But I'm grateful anyway." He gave a small smile. "Then we're even." And in that moment, they both knew this wasn't the end of a crisis. It was the beginning of something new, because sometimes it takes falling apart to realize you were never meant to hold it all together alone. And sometimes the person who steps forward in your darkest hour isn't a hero in a cape, but someone who's been in the dark themselves and still chooses to bring a light. The company picnic was held on a warm Saturday in late spring, under a sky so blue it looked painted. Strings of fairy lights hung between the trees. Kids ran barefoot through the grass, and the smell of grilled corn and fresh lemonade filled the air. It wasn't the usual stiff, formal event Viridian used to host. No name tags, no forced networking, no speeches about market share. This was different. This felt like a real gathering of real people. She stood near the edge of the field, watching her daughter and his son, hunched over a bright red Lego set at one of the picnic tables. They'd been at it for nearly an hour, building something they called the Sky Fortress, a spaceship with wings, a slide, and a secret snack compartment. Every few minutes, one of them would burst out laughing at something the other said, and the sound carried across the lawn like music. She hadn't planned to come. Too much still on her plate, too many fires to put out. But then her daughter had looked up from her breakfast that morning and said, "You promised you'd be at the picnic. You said you wouldn't miss it like the recital." So she came, and she stayed. He walked over, holding 2 paper cups of lemonade. He handed her one. "They've been at it since 9, he said, nodding toward the kids. "Noah says Lily's the best builder he's ever met. She says he's the only one who doesn't. Think her robot ideas are weird." They smiled at each other, the kind of quiet smile that holds 1,000 unspoken understandings. It had been 6 months since that night in the hospital. 6 months of slow healing, of new routines, of learning how to live differently. She still ran the company, but she didn't let it run her. She left the office by 6 most days. Took Fridays off for family-first afternoons, no exceptions. And when emergencies came up, she trusted her team to handle them. Because she'd finally learned that leadership isn't about control. It's about trust. He'd been promoted, not because of favoritism, but because people saw what she'd seen. Wisdom, empathy, and a deep understanding of what it means to care for others. He now led the Employee Wellbeing Program, a role he'd helped to design from the ground up. He'd turned it into something real: support groups for grieving parents, flexible scheduling for caregivers, even a small fund to help employees cover unexpected childcare costs. It wasn't flashy, but it mattered, and it was working. People stayed longer at Viridian now. Morale had gone up. Productivity hadn't dropped, it had actually risen. Because when people feel seen, they show up fully. When they're not drowning in secret stress, they bring their best selves to work. She took a sip of lemonade. "I got invited to speak at the Global Leadership Summit next month." "Oh yeah?" he asked, leaning against the picnic table. "Yeah. They want me to talk about redefining corporate culture." She paused. "I think I'll tell them about that night in the garage." He looked at her, surprised. "You sure?" "I am," she said. "Because the truth is I didn't change the company." "You did," he shook his head. "No, we did." She let that sit for a moment. Maybe he was right. Later, during the picnic games, the kids raced through a 3-legged sack race, laughing so hard they kept falling over. She cheered from the sidelines, clapping until her hands stung. He stood beside her, arms crossed, smiling in that quiet way he had. Proud, present, at peace. After the games, as families gathered for ice cream, she walked with him toward the edge of the park, where a small community garden had been planted. In one corner, half-built but clearly loved, stood a wooden treehouse. It wasn't fancy, just sturdy planks, a rope ladder, and a little window with a flower box. But it was real, and it was theirs. Noah had been the one to suggest they build it together. "Lily can help design it," he'd said, "and you and my dad can hammer the nails," so they did. Every other Sunday for the past 2 months, the 4 of them had shown up with tools, snacks, and big dreams. She'd never held a hammer before. He'd never explained blueprints to a 10-year-old. But they figured it out, together. Now, as they stood beneath its shadow, she said, "It's better than I imagined." "It's not done yet," he said. "Still need to add the roof. We'll get there." He looked at her. "You know, I used to think people like you didn't have time for things like this. And I used to think people like you didn't see the big picture," she admitted. "But you saw it before I did. You saw that a company isn't just numbers, it's people, families, hearts." He nodded. "And you listened." That was the real miracle. Not the promotions, not the programs, not even the treehouse. It was the listening, the willingness to hear someone's pain and not look away, to step forward even when it's not your job, to say, You're not alone, and mean it. A few weeks later, she stood on a stage in front of hundreds of executives, investors, and CEOs from around the world. The room was sleek, modern, full of people in expensive suits talking about disruption and innovation. She wore a simple blazer, no heels, and carried a single sheet of paper. She didn't open with data. She didn't quote market trends. She started with a story. "I want to tell you about a night in a parking garage," she began. "About a woman who had everything the world said she should want: power, success, respect, but was crying on a cold floor because she felt completely alone. And about a man who saw her not as a title but as a person and simply said, 'You're not alone.'" She told them about grief, about burnout, about the cost of pretending we have it all together. She told them about the hospital, the Lego spaceship, the treehouse, the handwritten notes. "And here's what I learned," she said, her voice steady but warm. "Real leadership doesn't happen in boardrooms. It happens in the quiet moments when we choose kindness over efficiency, presence over performance, humanity over hierarchy." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "We keep building companies that demand perfection. But people aren't perfect. We're messy, we grieve. We get tired. We need each other. And the strongest organizations, the ones that truly last, are the ones that make space for that truth." When she finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then slowly people began to stand. Not all of them, but enough. And in their eyes she saw something familiar: relief, hope, recognition. After the talk, a young woman approached her, eyes glistening. "My son's been struggling since his dad left," she whispered. "I've been trying to do it all. Work, school, everything. I feel like I'm failing." "You're not failing," she said gently. "You're just human. And that's more than enough." She gave the woman a card, not with her title but with the number for Viridian's support line. "Call anytime," she said, "even if just to talk." Back home that night, she found a note slipped under her door. No envelope, just a folded piece of notebook paper. "You spoke for all of us today. Thank you for remembering that we lead with our hearts, not just our resumes." She smiled and tucked it into her journal, right beside the old handkerchief, still clean, still kept close. Life wasn't perfect now. There were still late nights, tough decisions, moments of doubt. But something fundamental had changed. She no longer carried the weight alone, and neither did he. One evening, as the sun set behind the city, they sat on the porch of the finished treehouse watching the kids inside, giggling over a flashlight and a book of ghost stories. Fireflies blinked in the grass. The air smelled like warm earth and possibility. "I never thought I'd be happy again," he said quietly. "Me neither," she replied. "But here we are. Here we are." And in that simple truth, everything was said. Because healing doesn't look like a grand finale. It looks like showing up, like building something together. One nail, one conversation, one act of courage at a time. It looks like a CEO and a single father, once strangers, now friends, sitting in the quiet dusk, knowing they've found something rare, not just success, but belonging. And sometimes that's enough to change everything.